There is a kind of strength that comes from being seen, not the strength of force, not the strength of size or speed or cunning, but a quieter kind. The strength that comes when there is nothing to hide, when the system itself is visible to anyone who cares to look. Most financial power throughout history has been built on the opposite principle, on secrecy, on information held tightly by those who benefit from others not knowing, on complexity that serves to obscure rather than clarify. This has worked. For centuries, it has worked. Fortunes have been built on knowing what others do not know. Institutions have maintained their advantage by keeping their operations opaque, but there is another way. Some systems gain their strength not by hiding, but by revealing, not by complexity, but by clarity, not by making themselves difficult to understand, but by making themselves impossible to misunderstand. There is a city in Northern Europe where this principle has shaped nearly everything about how finance operates. Stockholm. It is not the largest financial center. It does not command the attention that other cities demand. It does not appear in headlines about market movements or spectacular deals. But within this city, a financial culture has developed that operates differently from most of the world. A culture built not on what is hidden, but on what is shown. Transparency. The word has become common in recent decades. It appears in annual reports and regulatory frameworks and political speeches. It has become something that institutions claim without always meaning. But in Stockholm, it is not a claim. It is a practice, a way of operating that has been refined over generations until it became simply the way things are done. This did not happen by accident. It emerged from a particular history, a particular set of values, a society that decided at some point that openness was not a weakness to be managed, but a strength to be cultivated. The effects of this decision extend far beyond politics or social policy. They reach into the heart of how financial institutions operate, how they relate to each other, how they relate to the public, how they build the trust that makes long-term finance possible. Consider what happens when rules are clear, when everyone knows what is permitted and what is not, when the standards are public, when enforcement is consistent, when there are no special arrangements for those with connections or influence. Fear diminishes. Not all fear, of course. Markets will always carry risk. Investments will always involve uncertainty. No amount of transparency can eliminate the fundamental unpredictability of economic life. But a particular kind of fear diminishes. The fear of being cheated, the fear of rules that apply to some but not to others, the fear that the game is rigged in ways you cannot see. This fear is corrosive. It undermines trust. It makes people cautious in ways that limit their participation. It creates friction in every transaction as parties try to protect themselves from dangers they cannot fully assess. When the rules are clear and consistently applied, this friction decreases. People can participate with greater confidence. They can make decisions based on the actual risks of the investment rather than the risks of the system itself. Stockholm's financial culture has internalized this understanding. The regulations are accessible. The operations of institutions are visible. The standards apply equally. There is no sense that some participants operate by different rules than others. This creates a particular kind of environment, one where trust is easier to establish because it is based on verifiable information rather than reputation or relationship alone. The institutions here carry themselves with a certain restraint. There is no boasting, no aggressive self-promotion, no suggestion that they have discovered secrets unavailable to others. Instead, there is a quiet competence, a willingness to be evaluated on the basis of what can be seen rather than what is claimed. A confidence that comes not from mystique, but from demonstrated performance. This is a different kind of credibility than the credibility of power or prestige. It is the credibility of openness, the credibility that says, look at what we do, examine it closely, and judge for yourself. For patient capital, this credibility matters. Patient capital does not seek excitement. It does not chase the next opportunity. It looks for environments where wealth can be preserved across time without constant vigilance against hidden dangers. When a system is transparent, patient capital can rest more easily. The threats that exist are visible. They can be assessed and managed. There are no shadows where unknown risks might be lurking. This makes Stockholm attractive to a certain kind of investor. Not the investor seeking spectacular returns, not the investor who thrives on volatility and information advantages, but the investor who values predictability, who measures success across decades rather than quarters, who prefers boring and safe to exciting and dangerous. The society that surrounds Stockholm's financial system reinforces these values. There is a cultural expectation of openness here, an assumption that information should be shared rather than hoarded, a discomfort with excessive secrecy or unnecessary complexity. This expectation applies to individuals and institutions alike. Those who seem to be hiding something attract suspicion. Those who operate openly attract trust. Financial institutions exist within this cultural context. They absorb its expectations. They operate according to its norms. Even when not legally required to be transparent, they often are, because the culture rewards openness and punishes opacity. This cultural foundation is difficult to replicate. It cannot be created through regulation alone. It must emerge from shared values developed over generations, from a collective understanding that transparency serves everyone better than secrecy. Stockholm has this foundation. It has been building it for a very long time. The physical city reflects something of this character. It is open, light-filled, at least in summer. The architecture does not intimidate. The public spaces are accessible. There is no sense of barriers between those inside the institutions and those outside. The water runs through everything. Islands connected by bridges. The old town and the new districts and the business centers all visible to each other across the channels. This visibility feels appropriate. A city where things can be seen, where the layout itself suggests that nothing is hidden away. The pace is measured, not slow exactly, but not frantic. People move with purpose, but without the aggressive urgency you find in financial centers built on different principles. There is time here, time to consider, time to verify, time to ensure that things are being done correctly rather than just quickly. This patience is part of the transparency. Rushing creates errors, errors that must be hidden or explained away. A more measured pace allows for accuracy, and accuracy supports openness. The relationship between transparency and stability is not always obvious. One might think that seeing everything would create anxiety, that knowing every risk, every vulnerability, every potential problem would make people more afraid rather than less. But the opposite tends to be true. Fear thrives in uncertainty, in the spaces where you cannot see what might be coming, in the gap between what you know and what you suspect. When the system is visible, uncertainty decreases, not because the risks disappear, but because they can be assessed. You know what you are dealing with. You can prepare. You can make informed decisions. This is the gift that transparency offers. Not the elimination of risk, but the elimination of unknown risk. The conversion of shadows into visible obstacles that can be navigated. Stockholm's financial system has embraced this gift. The stability here is not the stability of rigidity. Rules change, institutions adapt, The system evolves as circumstances require. But the stability comes from predictability, from knowing how changes will be made, from trusting that the process will be visible and the reasoning will be explained. This is a different kind of stability than what you find in places that rely on power or tradition or secrecy. It is stability built on continuous verification, on the ongoing ability to see and evaluate and adjust. It requires more effort in some ways. Opacity is easier. Hiding things is simpler than explaining them. Complexity that obscures is easier to maintain than clarity that reveals. But the effort pays returns. In trust, in participation, in the willingness of patient capital to commit for the long term. The people who work in Stockholm's financial institutions understand this bargain. They accept the demands of transparency as part of the cost of doing business here. The scrutiny, the requirement to explain, the inability to hide behind complexity or tradition. In return, they operate in an environment of unusual trust, where their counterparts can be relied upon because everyone is operating under the same visible rules, where disputes are resolved according to clear principles rather than relative power. This makes the work different than in other financial centers. Less energy is spent on protection, on guarding against the hidden moves of others, on trying to see through the opacity that surrounds transactions. More energy can be directed toward the actual work, the analysis, the decision-making, the construction of arrangements that serve the actual purposes of the parties involved. This efficiency is invisible. It does not show up in any measurement, but it is real. The reduction of friction, the simplification that comes when trust is easier to establish. There is something almost peaceful about a system that works this way. Not the peace of inactivity. The work continues. Decisions are made. Capital is allocated. Risks are taken and managed. But the peace of confidence, of operating in an environment where the rules are known and followed, where the ground is solid, where the system itself is not a source of anxiety. The morning light comes late in winter here and early in summer. The seasons are extreme. The darkness of December, the endless light of June. But through all of it, the work continues. The institutions open their doors. The transactions are processed. The relationships are maintained. All of it visible. All of it documented. All of it available for examination by those who have reason to look. The files are maintained. The records are kept. The history is preserved, not because someone might ask, but because this is how things are done. Because transparency is not a response to demand, but a way of operating, a default rather than an exception. Somewhere, an investor is evaluating options, looking at different environments where capital might be placed, considering not just the returns, but the systems, the rules, the visibility, and Stockholm appears as an option. Not the most exciting, not promising the highest returns, but offering something else: clarity, predictability, the assurance that what is seen is what exists, that there are no hidden arrangements or invisible risks. For some investors, this is enough. This is more than enough. The capital flows in, quietly, without announcement, taking its place within a system designed to be understood. The afternoon fades. The city moves toward evening. The lights come on in office buildings where the work is wrapping up for the day. Tomorrow it will begin again. The same transparency, the same visibility, the same quiet confidence that comes from having nothing to hide. The system continues. Open, visible, available for inspection. It does not need to prove itself with spectacle. It proves itself by being seen. And so it works, day after day, visible, clear, continuing.